Thank you. We're here for the subcommittee for the finance committee, put the schools. I called a meeting to order at 5:13. Two members present. I'm John Willahen, Mrs. Wilson. So just kind of look for a budget presentation, upcoming budget presentation. Over to you.
Yeah,
Okay.
sounds great. Really looking forward to it. Thank you for this. I didn't know I got to be the first subcommittee meeting. All right, Anthony, you want to do an overview intro?
Yeah, I just so
Push. Sam's.
yes. Normally we come to the school committee around this time of year to provide an update on our budget development process for the upcoming school year. As you all are well aware, the school committee has set up subcommittees, and the last time we met, the presentation of the FY23 budget was referred to subcommittee. So this is a real high-level overview of the budget development process, which I think is important for the community to know and the school committee to know how we come up with the budget, what our major revenue sources are, and kind of a general overall picture of what to expect. I will say that this year is unlike any other year that we've ever experienced. We are normally in a position every year since I've been here where we are just trying to maintain services and figure out a way to do that while cutting $4 million out of our budget. So one of my focus areas as CFO for the first 5 years was to how could we do this in a way that has minimal impact on the classroom, and we've trimmed a lot of the fat and found a lot of efficiencies, and we were at a place before unprecedented, ESSER dollars and Student Opportunity Act money came in. We were at a place where there was no more efficiencies outside of the classroom to realize, where any loss of revenue or increase in expenses was having a real impact on our ability to maintain level services. So,
Can I ask you a question real quick?
of course,
So, money that was set aside, this is before the pandemic, for the Student Opportunity Act, is that money now included in this budget?
it is, and we'll present that.
Okay, that's
So-
what. Now,
Yes.
was that the case last year too? I know with the COVID and everything kind of got held
No,
up.
this was year one of the Student Opportunity
This was year
Act.
one anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
they did give us money and told us, hey, SOA's here, but they cut our budget by $4 million. So it was like SOA was just enough to cover, our core services. So we'll get into more detail on that, but I will kick it over to our not so newly appointed, but our Chief Financial Officer, Mickey Buell, who has been in the district for almost 5 years.
No, I think this is 6.
This is
Gonna
six.
Be 6 at the end of this year.
In another capacity, but we were lucky enough to have Mickey having gone through the MASBO program and getting licensed as a school business administrator, and then me twisting his arm a little bit and convincing him to
He's good
take
at
on
that.
this new role.
He is good.
He's good at that, I heard.
He is good.
Although I didn't have to twist his arm too much, he jumped at the opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting.
Right.
And I mean, I just say it is great to come into the CFO role. I've been doing kind of a key role leading the high school redesign development process early on, and then helping to implement some of the new programs at the high school over the last 5 years. And that was now the end of like 25 years of being a school leader. So it does feel like a brand new career. But the thing I say, I've been a budget guy well before I was a school leader. So my first job was in Congress in the Congressional Budget Office.
Sure.
the last time we had a budget surplus as a nation. I was at CBO.
Oh, there you go.
So, just saying. So,
That's for the record.
yeah. But it's also great getting to work with Anthony in this, because it is really unprecedented times and really important that we have smart financial decision-making under this completely different circumstance of making sure we're making good investments. So, so we have a pretty short presentation, and then some of the questions will be much more detailed, and I don't know how much time we have for this. Is this
25
until
minutes,
6? Okay, so then I think it's fine. If you have questions
a little
along the
before
way,
6,
it's
yeah.
absolutely fine to stop and ask those questions along the way. All right. So, so my slide doesn't do it. So go ahead and on to the second slide. So we're going to go over the high level of the budget. So basically, there's revenue and expenses. Now, the revenue, the overall increase in revenue is up 8.3%. It's unprecedented state history. And it is driven by the second bullet point there, an increase of 7.4 million in the required net school spending amounts, almost 8%. We've been to a couple different presentations by people who really study statewide trends on education funding, and this is so far beyond the norm that it's due to several factors. The biggest one is that Student Opportunity Act implementation. Now, there's a couple layers within that also enhance the funding for Holyoke, but that increase is despite a decrease in enrollment of 126 students, which normally when you have a small decrease in enrollment, it really can be a budget killer. So some very good news on the state level with their revenue streams, and they're able to fully fund the Student Opportunity Act goals. You'll see this on the revenue side, but it's going to come back on the cost side. The reimbursement for charter school tuition is also up a lot. However, we added that bullet point there. The pandemic created some volatility in charter school enrollment for the first time that made that number vary quite a bit throughout the year that we're currently in. So we have to wait for the information from the state on that, but that could change pretty substantially like it did this year. Transportation funding, we're expecting an increase of 4% for transportation funding. And then the biggest thing on the revenue side is we have the federal COVID relief funds, the ESSER money, and that was used to supplement the operating budget in intentional investments this past year, and we'll go into those a little bit later, and we certainly anticipate doing that again.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight with the two of you that 4% increase
I was gonna say, because of the
in transportation.
last year's cut, that's why, right?
I want to thank the city council because I came to them in the middle of this year, and I told them this was a year where we have to go out to bid, and I can almost guarantee you that if we go out to bid this year, we're gonna see 20-30% increases in transportation costs, and they allowed us to extend our existing 3-year contract for another 2 years, which allowed us to keep this increase pretty modest. Had they not done that, we would have seen a significant increase in transportation costs. With going out and a lot of transportation companies lost a lot of money during the pandemic. And they are recouping that as you go out to bid for these services. So I think it was a very smart move on the city's part to allow us to do that, and that's why you see a modest increase here, not the 15-20% that I had been talking about in the winter.
So that we'll see an increase then. We may expect a large increase in the 25-26 school year?
I don't
or
think so.
24?
Well, so the 2 years are this current year we're in.
Oh, the current year,
and
right.
next year.
Okay.
And so then the timing of it is really good because some changes then coming.
I don't think that's right, Mickey. The 2 years is next year and the following year. So we have 2 predictable years of increases, and I anticipate that by then we will have had enough time to see how the market reacted to everything, and do a real bid that will allow competition. The problem with this year is I don't think we would have had competition because transportation companies were like short staffed. So they would have looked at a contract like Holyoke and said, "There's no way we can get into Holyoke. We can't find staff. We're not going to get our fleet up and ready." So they would have backed out, and it would have been left with one vendor, which is
Set the
kind of a
price.
monopoly. And at that point, they can set the price to whatever they want when they know they're the only vendor. I think in a couple years, we'll be able to bounce back. The transportation industry itself, hopefully, would have bounced back, and we'll be able to put out a competitive bid and get that competition that we like to see in these big contracts.
So then moving on to the next tab, next slide, thanks, Dan. So just a couple high-level things in expense. We'll look at the full list in the next slide. But salaries, we're projecting at this point we're going to increase by $3.5 million or 6%. That's mostly due to investment in very purposeful investments. Slide, I apologize for the second. So a decrease of the non-salary spending, slight decrease. Right now we're projecting supplies and services. Health insurance going up by more than other costs, but retired teacher health insurance going down. We get that straight from others, but that right now is going down. And then you see that charter school tuition. So you saw the big increase in the reimbursement that the state was going to give us, and a healthy increase in the costs on our side. Now, this current year we're in, the reimbursement went down mid-year by more than the expenditure side. So volatility in that charter school line. So the next slide is what we call our budget blueprint, and you'll see columns there where we start with last year's budget. Then we move progressively as we get more information through the state budget process. So the first column says governor's budget that was in late January. That was what we projected our budget to be based on the information that came out right away after Governor Baker released his budget. Then just recently, Anthony and I felt confidently confirming what we have as a level services budget based on the level services projection currently in that next column. And then the change columns are between the level services and last year's final budget. And so there's a lot of detail in here. Tell me, would it help to kind of look and ask questions? I could talk through line by line about how each line works. You tell me what would be the most helpful.
Yeah, so the previous two slides is actually speaking to this. So
Pulling out some highlights.
What we tried to do is go line by line in the major changes categories, and we summarized it. So you can see here, when we said our net school spending amount is going up 8%, you see that on the first line. You see transportation going up. You see charter tuition reimbursement going up by 1.6 million. The salaries going up by 6%. So we summarized that on the previous two slides, and this slide just kind of brings it all together. So that it's something that if when we give you a hard copy, you can have and
Yeah, that's what I
and
did,
ask
yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
But we did try to highlight that on the previous slide, all the major changes. And the one thing I'll say around health insurance is that it's really tentative in the process. So I know the city goes through a process where they meet with Section 19 and they have to select, who we're gonna have for health insurance and all that. What we have in here is just a placeholder of a 7% increase over our previous budget. But some of these high level accounts that Mickey just talked about are things that, as we go through the budget development process, we really keep a close eye on and update as needed. So once the city gets further along in their negotiations with health insurance, we'll be able to better predict what that number is going to be. Right now, we just have a placeholder of 7%. And the big jump in charter assessments and school choice, it's not because more kids are going to charter schools. The reason is the Student Opportunity Act, right? So just like we're getting more money for economically disadvantaged students in our Chapter 70 amount, the charter schools are also getting more money. So
Okay.
I would expect to see those two things going hand in hand. As the district gets more money for the Student Opportunity Act, so are the charter schools. It doesn't mean that more students are going to charter schools. It's just that the charter schools are there getting their fair share of the Student Opportunity Act as well.
That was my question. I mean, the reimbursement of the Chapter 70 reimbursement, that's due to the state law changing the.
That is
Okay.
the biggest
Right.
driver of it. Now,
Alright,
there's a
that
couple other things. They also used a higher inflation expectation,
Okay,
and so
okay.
that drove it to some extent. So even though we get this nice big increase, we are all dealing with inflation at a level we haven't for a long time. So that was the other big driver, but there's no question that the Student Opportunity Act was the key driver in this increase, particularly for us here in Holyoke.
That was the main, when I sat on this committee 7 years ago, that was the biggest change, the biggest trial that we had. We were just losing ground every year. We're just getting further away in terms of the revenue source, and we're losing ground more and more each year. So I'm just, for the record, happy to see that trend being reversed.
We are
I know.
100% with you on that. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and one thing that's really interesting is we've seen more students choicing into Holyoke than ever before. I wouldn't say than ever before. I trended the last 5 years, and we've doubled the amount of students that are actually choicing in to Holyoke Public Schools. So I think that's a testament to some of our high school redesign work, and but it was an interesting trend because people don't talk about that, right?
Yeah.
I did want to highlight one thing for this committee. In this the revenue portion of this spreadsheet, there are items below the adjusted net school spending amount of 104. There are items that are not eligible for net school spending. So the way the formula works is they calculate based on median house wages, based on property values, based on there's so many factors that go into the Chapter 70 formula. But one thing they do say for sure is there's a number that you can point to that says this is the minimum amount required that you have to spend if you want some Chapter 70 dollars, or you're gonna see some penalties. And I say that because there's no other department in the city that you can point to a number that says, this is the minimum required by law. Like, we can speculate that other departments are underfunded, but or are at like bare bones. But like, one thing for sure is you could point to Holyoke Public Schools and point to the number, and we're funded at that very minimum number.
Right, by our
which-
city.
By it's no knock
it's-
on the city. It's
Yeah.
just
No, I'm
it's-
just saying
yeah.
the funds available, but that's the amount that the city puts into the budget.
so there's two components. There's Chapter 70, and then there's the required city
Local.
contribution.
Yep.
The two of those things combined are what make up your net school
And
spending requirement.
That's the very first two lines.
Correct.
And those are the two lines that come out. And it actually, pretty good segue, Anthony, if we go to the next slide, Sam.
I don't want to move on just yet.
You
I
want
want
else?
to.
Okay.
I wanted to explain the items that are not eligible for net school spending. So, in addition to that requirement that you have to spend on educational expenses, the law is written that transportation and any leases that are greater than 3 years old and any adult education services outside of pre-K to 12 cannot count towards educational expenses as part of your net school spending requirement, which is why on top of the city's local contribution, they have to give us money for transportation, they have to give us money for all of our leases, and they have to give us money for any adult education that we have built into the budget. I bring that to you as a newer member just because
Yeah.
you always hear in the paper about our leases and about transportation costs, and that's because those are things that are outside of the net school spending requirement that the city has greater control about whether or not they're funding. And historically, that's what, when you look at the paper, they talk about the central office lease and transportation costs. Those are outside of the net school spending requirement, but they are a responsibility of the city, not the school department to fund. And I do bring attention to that because there is a lease that we have right now that has reached its third year. It is the lease for the transitions program over at Square One. This was an agreement that was entered into 3 years ago. We've been able to pay for it out of the school department's budget, and this is the year where it transitions to the city having to pay for it. And I say that because I know it's going to come up in city council, and I want you to be aware why there's this increase of 24%.
47,000, yeah.
It's because we have a lease of the transitions program, which is a program for kids that are after high school transitioning into the into and it's a special ed program that we have in our district that we think is really thriving and really good for this community, and this expense supports that. So we
Yep.
now I wanted to highlight that for you especially.
So what I'm hearing is that, so it's the lease for the Transition Academy, and
Yep.
then based upon the grades, or, the age group, it's based on adult services. So that's also the services that are necessary to provide through the Transition Academy is not eligible as well.
The Transition Academy would be eligible. That's not considered adult education.
Thank
They're
you.
called special populations
Right, so that's
in
what
our
my
chapter
clarification.
70.
Thank you.
We have an adult ed program that we're serving adults who are pursuing their equivalency diploma.
Yep.
Now that number, the 237,000, is just made up of leases. So
Yep.
that's just the Transitions Academy lease, which is the addition, and then the 190,000 is related to the Suffolk Street
Yep.
lease.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
Great.
point. So now if you kind of go right off of the first two lines, this next slide is one that really is highly relevant for us in Holyoke. And it's that much more than some communities, we depend on the state budget process. And so that blueprint where we track each step in the state process is critically important for us to be able to set our budget, because almost 90% of the revenue that of our operating budget comes from that state contribution. So it says 88% is for this current year. So just a tick under $90 million of the required net school spending amount comes from the state, and just under 12 will come from the city's contribution to the schools. Right, and like Anthony said, that 12 is the portion of the required net school spending, and that's why Anthony highlighted the transportation costs and those lease costs that are outside of that would be in addition to that. So we can go to the next slide, Sam. So this is a simplified version of the path to the budget becoming a law in the state. And, many districts don't follow this as closely, but we follow very closely.
Right.
And so if you grew up singing the Schoolhouse Rock song, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill, like this is the actual path. And we right now are anticipating the House Ways and Means Committee budget coming out sometime soon. But the whole process doesn't end until early July. And it's not until then that we really we'll adjust the budget, even though we're setting our budget well before the state finishes. We'll have to adjust it based on that when it becomes a law. All right. So within our internal budget development process, we can go to the next slide, Sam, and there's a couple, it's more than just, it's like a couple clicks here. So as we pay attention to the state process, we also go through a two-stage development process. So we start with the chiefs in the central office who are in charge of their departments, and we set those departmental budgets. And then we're right now in the middle of the school development process. We rolled out the budgets to school leaders very recently, and they're in the development process of developing their detailed budgets. And by the middle of April, we will have reviewed and approved the school budgets with Anthony, and move on. So can you hit the button one more time? Thank you. Now, throughout that, we've got some pretty interesting stuff. Like, the positive is that we're not doing what for 22 of the 25 years as a school leader I was doing. I was figuring out how to cut the budget. But we also are trying to think, okay, what's the right investments? The Student Opportunity Act is going to continue to fund an increase in our general operating budget for the next several years. How can we use this temporary COVID money to begin those investments in the smartest way possible to advance the key priorities?
How long is this ESSER money available for? Is it like an annual?
So there were 3 rounds
Okay.
of funding passed by the Congress and signed by the president. The first round is done and spent.
Right.
The second round, we call ESSER 2, has to be spent entirely by next year. And the third round,
Next year?
by
it's
the
through
end of, yeah, by the, by,
end of yeah, okay.
it is, yeah, no, it's federal money, so it would be by
To the
the end
summer,
of
right?
August of next year. So we basically have all of next school year
Right,
to invest that money.
okay, thank you.
Then the third round, which is the biggest, it was the bill that passed, after Biden was elected, and was, that one is due for all of next school year and the following school year, and it has to be used by the end of that 23-24 year.
Is there any thought of giving like a stipend to the teachers and the staff that were affected by the COVID? Some of
Yeah.
the school districts
Great question.
So
did that. I think Holyoke even on the city side has
The
done
city
it.
just did.
yeah, we
I
actually
I will say that the school system was a
we actually
our
did it.
employees were affected more in the school system than
We actually did it before the city did it, Jay.
okay, good.
And that was not by design. Like Josh and I had been talking about aligning our messaging. But yes, we announced on last Monday that every single employee in the in Holyoke Public Schools that was with us before the pandemic and it commits to us for next school year is going to get $3,500. Anyone who started, after the pandemic, we have the dates
Yeah.
spelled out, and commits to us for next year will get $2,500. And anybody that just started this year and is committing to us for next year will get $1,000. So that's twofold. It's not just about trying to retain good teachers. It's also a thank you because let's be honest. Some of the staff that have been here for 10 years, 5 years, 7 years, they're committed to Holyoke. They're Holyoke, and they love this community, and they're going to stay here. So to those people, it wasn't really a retention strategy. It was a thank you.
That's yeah.
Um,
I mean, yeah. I saw the article in the paper. I just wanted for the record. Okay, thank you.
yeah, and I think the piece that I feel is missing here that I want to make sure we clearly articulate to you is that the budget development process is a decentralized process. It's not me and Mickey sitting in an office saying, "Here's the budget and that's what you get and that's it." No, we have each chief and department head is responsible for developing their budget and making recommendations to me on what changes they would need to make or what new initiatives they would want. And similar to that, every single principal, they are given a significant amount of discretionary funds. In fact, we've increased the amount of discretionary funding available to principals in this school year and in the upcoming school year. We've increased it significantly. So we give a staff allocation based on target class size ratios and things that we need to, like we feel are core to operating a school. And then there's a significant amount of funding that is giving to each principal, and they work with the finance team. They work with their school supervisor, and they work with the academic and sped team to develop a budget that meets the needs of their school. I think that's important because there's this like misconception. Oftentimes there's this misconception around like how we develop a budget. This is a very decentralized budget where principals get to take a look at their own needs and develop a spending plan that meets those needs. And it includes a significant amount of money for supplies too. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Did you have a question?
I do have a question. So I'm going to kind of get into the weeds a little bit from the standpoint of we see, students are struggling academically with COVID. There's the COVID lag in some cases of students, having more challenges with reading and their math and looking at some of our data. With that, has there been any discussions of adding, more paraprofessionals from the standpoint of adding them? I know we typically had them in kindergarten, but adding them to first grade to facilitate more of that guided reading process for our teachers so they could help manage the students be independent during that direct instruction time?
I think that's a perfect segue
Okay.
into the priorities, and we'll outline some of the key priorities
Okay.
of what has been funded using this money, and then we can talk a little bit about the new initiative process and the review. That there's a ton of ideas around
Right.
these main priorities. So Sam, if we
Let me answer that question before we move to the initiatives. Yes, there has been discussion about that. And yes, some principals have already done that. There's an instructional para in almost every classroom in at least in one of our schools. So remember I told you that we gave a significant amount of dollars
Correct.
to schools. Many of them chose to purchase instructional paras, and they're there supporting teachers. We didn't, as a district, say you have to have them in these grades, but we will be going through a strategic development process, and I don't know where exactly that's going to land, but I know some principals have already started to do that with money that we gave them.
I think you'll see like
That's fine.
it's
Go ahead.
right at one of the
You go
core
right
entry
ahead.
points. So Sam, why don't we hit the button? So the transition slide here, we're going to go through the priorities in two ways.
Perfect.
What the priorities indicated as we were coming into this year were, and then the entry plan findings that from Anthony's complete entry plan. So go ahead and so this is a collection of results from a 0 to 3 standpoint of what areas did a very widespread survey across the community with a lot of responses indicate were the most important things coming into this year. So this would have been a year ago as we were developing the budget for the current year that we're in. And so you can see that coming out of COVID, we hadn't yet returned to in-person school, so safely returning was the highest priority. But counseling and K-12 intervention, so very much along the lines of what you're talking about, Ellie, we're right there. The OA stands for Opportunity Academy, which is one of the key dropout prevention and credit recovery and graduation support programs. So a lot of concern about that at the high school. And then the learning loss right there. So everything that you hit was very key. So Sam, if we go through the next things, and there's probably 3 taps to get all 3 out there. So these are the 3 primary findings from Anthony's entry plan process. And do you want to just describe like either just all 3 or just how you came to these 3 rising to the top?
Yeah, I think we did I provided my entry plan findings report, and through and throughout, like these were the 3 common themes. We need to make sure students are grade level ready, especially through strengthening literacy. I think particularly in the early grades is where our focus needs to be. And then we do definitely need to strengthen support for special populations like ELL and SPED. What we've been doing has not necessarily worked when you look at the data. And we just need to really make sure we're supporting our students so that need the most. And then lastly, creating a positive learning environment. We talked about behavior issues. We talked about students' social, emotional, and mental health needs. And, we really need to, that's something that came up consistently at all of our meetings, is creating that positive learning environment.
And we can hit that button to the next slide. So thank you, that's perfect. So these are some key investments that we've used the funds to make. So these were investments that were put in place for this current year. So increase the number of school counselors, created academic interventionist teachers at each school, math and
Which they
reading.
love.
That's great. I've
I've
glad.
spoken to several of the interventionists, both in reading and math, recently, and they definitely feel like they are meeting a need within those schools. And so it's a
Great.
great addition.
And it's a terrific, so it's not only that first entry plan finding of being prepared for grade level work, but it also hits at that supporting all students within classroom settings because it's not special ed or ESL based, it's helping all students.
Exactly.
Then also implemented a new expert teacher model, so every school has expert teachers in math and literacy. Increased the number of English language teachers that we have, and then established teams and management operations at schools so that principals were able to have support for the non-instructional work that principals do, allowing them to focus more on the instructional leadership piece. And so the total investment in those areas is over $5.5 million. If we go to the next tab, we'll see a couple other big investments. And so you hit the one about the retention bonuses. So those retention bonuses, $3.4 million dedicated to providing staff with that extra support for the work that they've done. And then
Mickey, I just want to say that's all staff. I want to make
All
sure it's
staff.
clear. All staff, cafeteria workers, custodians, teachers, paras, principals, all staff.
I think that's very important.
Yep.
That's important, thank you.
Yeah, the impact of COVID was felt across the board. There's no question about it. School changed dramatically. We also recently had approved by the state $7 million of facility improvements, which is pretty awesome to be able to get to upgrade several of the facilities that difficult things to do. So a lot of heating, ventilation improvements across the school, including a complete redesign of the system at McMahon School, which is a very antiquated, failing system. New phone systems, which if you talk to people in the schools, there's some schools the phone system just were far inadequate for the kind of communication that we should have in today's schools. Some significant outdoor improvements, entryways at several schools, and some outdoor learning space upgrades that are going to be pretty awesome, and then quite a bit of investment into devices to get us to the one-to-one device stage. We also are planning an investment of up to $800,000 into upgrading the equipment and the materials available in the CVT shops here at Dean. Something very exciting to do. The investment in Dean as part of the high school redesign has really been significant, and we've seen a lot of positive change, and now we have the opportunity to bring the equipment and the materials the students are learning with up to industry standards that we haven't been able to do in the past. And then we also, we talked about smartly investing the money. Things like the facility improvements are ways that we can do that without creating permanent costs and risking a cliff. As we transition to the middle school, there will be some increased costs there, some work that extra money will help ease that transition, and so we're very consciously planning to use some of the funds for that as well. So the final slide is positive outlook. with revenue. Student Opportunity Acts make a big difference. The ESSER money allows us to do things we couldn't normally do. And some of those investments we just talked about, we think are in the right direction. And we have to be very aware of the funding cliff. Right? The money that came through ESSER is big, and even though the projection of the general fund is very positive, things could change in the state economic picture, and so we have to make sure that for these next 2 school years, when we have this ESSER money, we're investing it smartly and making sure that we don't create a cliff for that following year. So
Thank you.
it was a pretty high-level overview,
Yeah.
but it's kind of exciting to get to talk to you about it for the first time.
Great.
Went to a meeting at the library about a year before the COVID kicked in, and we got the money was from the Student Opportunity Act was coming in, and he was really excited about getting that money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the COVID hit
Yeah.
right after that, so I remember that kind of dampened everyone's mood and spirit on that. So I'm
Yeah.
happy to see that a couple years later we're finally on the upswing in terms of getting the proper funding for the district.
So we are 1/6 of the way there. Every year they plan to implement a 1/6 more. So over the course of 6 years, we should see similar increases. I can't say that they'll be equal in amount, or some years will be greater than others. It all depends on revenue at the state level as well. But this year, this upcoming year represents 1/6 of what it
Okay.
would take to get us to a full Student Opportunity Act implementation. So I do want to thank you all. If there's additional information you'd like for us to share, we'd be happy to. I know that like I think the big picture here is that we're not in a year where we're cutting the budget. We're in fact asking principals we're increasing the amount of money we're giving principals to develop their spending plans, and then being real one thing that we're being real thoughtful with this year is including our special ed department and our academics department in the budget development process,
At the school
which is a
levels.
change.
Yep.
It was always an expectation, but I'm just being a little more explicit that I want them at the table. We haven't been as strict on demanding their presence at the table. So I want the supports that we have in place at the central office to be there as thought partners and helping principals develop their budgets to support different instructional designs that are going to get better outcomes for our students.
Absolutely.
Big deal. I can say that there's a unity of embracing that's very strong. So the special ed department, the academics department very much want to be at the table with principals, and the conversations with principals just since we shared the budgets with them have been very rich. Developing an individual school budget is a very complicated process, and some of the factors that we have with very small numbers of classes classes per grade level make some of the things create some restrictions, but really good process that has started with that.
So I
that
have
effort.
so coming from a special ed background, I have to say it makes me worry. I worry when we talk about the number of small groups classes and because the fact is we have to make sure we're meeting our legal obligation to our students when we write an IEP. If they do have that small group instruction, C-grid pull-out services, that's what they should be getting.
Yes, and they will.
Yeah, there's no question. We've had a lot of good
My
conversations. about
what we haven't been doing well is our regular ed teacher, our special ed teacher, and our ELL teacher working collaboratively to just do what's right for a particular student. I think that those 3 individuals with no bad intentions have just been working in silos, and I think that we need to create an environment where they can work together to meet the needs of the student, whether that be through pull out, through inclusion, but we definitely need the time for those folks to collaborate and just
Be a
design to be a team.
Team.
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, to be
And
a
it's
team
so
for their
hard to
students.
do because you know how
Oh.
teacher time
It's precious. And
is incredibly limited, and so making sure that we can arrange it so that teachers have that time to work together and share what they know about each student's needs and progress.
Mhm.
You and I, years ago, as we were
Yes,
talking about,
we
got
know.
to talk about that. It's when the teachers are the ones that drive the learning,
right.
right? And so getting the teachers who are working with the kid a chance to collaborate and share expertise and share instructional strategies together is the key. And that's really difficult to do, but the conversations between the principals and the academic team and the special ed team have been very positive in seeking those, seeking to figure out how to best do that.
If you could, provide a copy of this to the full committee.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I got paper copies I can leave with you guys right
That'd be
now.
great.
but-
I'd love
You
it.
want some
Thank
paper
you.
copies? All right,
Yes.
I'll drop off some paper copies right now.
Thank you so much,
I don't know if
Mickey.
anyone has any questions from the audience, or Mr. Collmore might have some questions.
Just a question.
I have to excuse myself. I apologize. There's something going on.
Okay, can you tell me, I know I came in late, but is there any provisions in this budget of expanding the vocational school to another shop?
No, we're not. We have no plans on growing our shops. We need to make our shops better before we start growing. We do have space limitations at Dean. We're co-locating the STEM school and the Dean school, so we wouldn't even have the capacity to expand until we get a new middle school and get the STEM school out of Dean. So, but there are significant investments that we did cover here. We're spending about $800,000, increasing, into our shops. I want to make sure, some of the equipment that I seen in some of these shops were there when I was in school at Dean, and that's a shame. So, I want
I
to make sure
understand.
Technology changes.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I
Thank you
appreciate your
much.
time.
Yes, it was a pleasure.
Pleasure for me too. Thanks, thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Mickey.